Hello, and thank you for joining us, and welcome to the Retirement Planning for People with Disabilities Ask an Expert webinar. Your host for this session is Hydrocephalus Canada. I'm Shauna Bodway, the Director of Programs and Information at Hydrocephalus Canada. I will be the moderator for tonight's session. In today's session, we will discuss how to plan your retirement, maximize credits, what happens with ODSP when you turn 65, how the RDSP can support you in retirement, when to apply for old age security and the guaranteed annual income supplement, and details about life and estate planning, powers of attorney, and wills. Tonight we have Kenneth Pope with us, who is a lawyer that practices in Ontario and offers specialized support to individuals with disabilities and their families. He is dedicated to providing legal, tax, and estate planning services for families across Canada. Through his experience in working with special needs families, Ken has become expert in writing wills with Henson trusts. These trusts ensure that parents of children with disabilities can protect inheritances while preserving provincial disability benefits. Ken is knowledgeable in the application of testamentary and inter vivos trusts. I hope I said that correctly. Assist protection, minimizing taxes on inherited assets, including income generated by those assets, powers of attorney, legal guardianship, competency issues, contested and uncontested estate administration, elder law, and succession planning in general. Ken also provides help with taxes credit adjustments, such as applying for new and retroactive disability and caregiver tax credits, appealing Canada Revenue Agency denials, and disability-related tax advice. Ken is a member in good standing of the Law Society of Upper Canada and is a member of the Society of Trust and Estate Practitioners, which is called STEP. Ken has an extensive background working with nonprofit and charitable organizations since 1975. He has been a founding member and has served as president and has been on the board and committees of numerous nonprofit organizations. Mr. Pope, thank you very much for joining us tonight. We are pleased to have you share your knowledge and expertise with the hydrocephalus and spina bifida community.
That's very kind, Shauna. Thank you. Well, I'm pleased to speak with everyone this evening, and it's certainly nice to have the opportunity to talk about retirement planning. I may give that some thought myself one day. I see we have 16 participants. That's an excellent number. And this will be a general discussion. I'd like to thank the people that sent in their questions. Knowing who you're speaking with certainly makes my job easier and more interesting. And I see that I have about, 18 or 20 questions. And the good thing is I have a few names, I have their ages, so I have a bit of a demographic of who I'm talking to. I understand that a lot of the people I'm speaking with are receiving ODSP benefits, but not all. And I'd like to point out that a lot of what we're discussing here is preparing for retirement, which let's just say means age 65, and that this will mean different things to people of different ages. Demographically, the peak of the baby boom, the biggest number of baby boomers turned 65 in 2021. So if you consider age 65 as retirement age, the largest number of people ever to turn 65 have just done it. And so anybody here who knows somebody 65 knows somebody at that peak. And what's happened, of course, is that there was a time years ago, not so long ago, when age 65 was old age. You know, you were really only expected to live a certain number of years past 65. So there was never really any serious discussion about funding of old age pensions and so on, because it wasn't much of a burden, frankly. But that said, I'm going to start with the simple information, the simple answers to the simple questions that people tend to ask. And then we'll start to talk about the variations and the preparations that can be done. So simplistically, the question that people ask is, I'm going to turn 65 next year. I understand that I'll be cut off ODSP, but I don't know what that's going to mean. What does that mean? So what it does mean is that when you turn 65, everyone who turns 65 stands to receive old age security payments, which are a form of income. And OAS, of course, is eroded as income gets higher and higher, but we won't touch on that part. But it starts out as about $6,500 a year. And I would say that the bulk of Canadians who make less than, in retirement, make less than 80,000 receive OAS, because they do. And then it starts to be eroded, and at a certain point above 100,000 and some, it's completely eroded. But I think the bulk of Canadians receive OAS. And then the guaranteed annual income supplement, or gains, is a social benefit. It's not income. And it's approximately $11,000. So between the two, there's $17,500, which, if you happen to be on ODSP, is more than the maximum, which is about 15,000 ODSP. You will then receive your drug coverage under the Ontario Drug Benefit Program. It's the same formulary as ODSP or the Trillium Program. For people who are receiving drugs under the Trillium Program based upon their income, it's the same coverage, except now it's free, aside from a $4.10 dispensing fee for your medications. So the transition financially is fine. Still doesn't give you a lot of money. That doesn't do that part, but gives you slightly more. And there's some bigger pieces to this puzzle that you'll start to see. I'm going to touch on a few things. Excuse me. A lot of people who are on ODSP will either inherit money from their parents directly because their parents have not put Henson trusts into their wills to protect ODSP benefits if they should die before the child is 65, or have put these trusts in place, which means that benefits will be protected. And there are two main reasons for the use of Henson trusts. One is, on the face of it, to protect ODSP benefits. The Henson trust can contain any amount of inheritance. There's no asset limit, and in practice, there's no limit as to how much can be dispersed from the trust. People may have heard about the 10,000 over 12-month gift rule, but this isn't really a restriction. It's not a practical restriction. What it also does, what these trusts also do, is they protect the inheritance from either, they assist someone who couldn't manage the inheritance themselves, or shouldn't, perhaps. There's lots of people who are financially unsophisticated or open to manipulation, who could lose a sizable piece of money. So the trust is intended to both to protect the asset protect benefits that the asset would offset, or the proper management of the money. We'll go into a little bit more about Henson trusts. What is happening also, and we've seen quite an uptick in it because of the demographics here in the last couple of years, is a steady stream of calls and emails about inheritances that people are coming into or have received that would disqualify them from ODSP because the parent didn't have a Henson trust in their will. And you can see that lots of people don't have Henson trusts in their wills. Perhaps they didn't know about it. Perhaps they just didn't get around to it. Meant to do it, never did. And so we regularly get calls, let's say 3 or 4 a week, from people who either are the heir, or they are the executor, or they are the sister of the person inheriting along with her, about this issue, about losing ODSP. What do I do? I'm in geared to income housing. Will I get kicked down to geared to income housing? So it causes quite a lot of anxiety. And we're almost always able to find ways to exempt this inheritance and to maintain ODSP and geared to income housing. But it's quite stressful for individuals in the interim. And what we're also seeing is not only an increase in the number of people who come into an inheritance directly, but the amount of the inheritance. As recently as 4 or 5 years ago, these inheritances might well have been 80,000, 120, 180, in that kind of range. But of course, housing has gone up so much in value that now the inheritances are much larger. And of course, as time goes by, if it's, for example, a baby boomer who is passing on, well, baby boomers didn't have 5 children. The parents of the boomers did. I'm the eldest of 5. In all of my grandmother's 7 children, all went on to have between 3 and 5 kids. Well, that's not the demographic anymore. The boomers might have had 2 or 3. The children of the boomers are all having 1 or none. So what's happening is we're seeing many more situations where someone is coming into a larger sum. I'd like to just touch briefly on the RDSP. They won't affect people who are now approaching 65 because, of course, the RDSPs were brought in essentially 2019. And after age 49, there are no matching grants and bonds. So you can see that obviously the number of people who are approaching 60 who have RDSPs with any significant amount of money is small. There's a 10-year vesting period for the grants and bonds. So these individuals who have RDSPs, the RDSP will play a large role in their retirement when that time comes. So it's part of this spectrum of planning for retirement. If you have a child who's 18 and qualifies for the disability tax credit, then the child could have an RDSP. And if you set it up and you put $1,500 a year into it, the child they'll receive a $1,000 bond, even if you contribute nothing. And if you put in $1,500, the RDSP receives a further $3,500. So in total, $6,000 a year. And this will continue for a 20-year period or until the child is 49 and the grants and bonds cease. But if you start these at age 18, make the normal contributions for 20 years, invest it at 5%, which historically has been realistic and is even more realistic right now, at 5% until the person is 60. At age 60, the RDSP is about $700,000 and starts to pay out under the standard LDAP program, pays out about $30,000 a year for 23 years. So of course, what we're going to be seeing in the future is people turning 60. They'll be receiving ODSP still of about $15,000 a year. They'll start receiving $30,000 from the RDSP. And then in 5 years, they'll start with OAS and guaranteed income supplements of about $17,500 and lose ODSP. And the income from the RDSP doesn't affect the guaranteed income supplement as other income does. So they would be receiving, in these kinds of wonderful scenarios, they'd be receiving $30,000 RDSP income and about $17,500, so $47,500 of income starting at age 65. Plus, if the parent has set up a Henson trust in their will, they would be receiving income or capital from the trust. And if they haven't set up a trust and the parent dies and leaves an inheritance, well, then the person will also have this asset. Now, what you do in that scenario is, of course, one thing you do is you'd want to set up a TFSA, a tax-free savings account, because you can presently put about $88,500 of your inheritance into the TFSA. It will grow. The growth will not be income, so that income won't offset your guaranteed income supplements. Otherwise, what happens is the guaranteed income supplement, the 11,000, for every dollar of other income, you lose 50 cents of the guaranteed income supplement. So you can see that if you receive, for example, CPP pension or income from some investment, for every dollar you receive or earn, you lose 50 cents, which is like a 50% tax. So the TFSA helps with that to some degree. And then from there, you think of other ways to defer income. So it's a moving target, but you can see that for each person, depending upon their age and their circumstances, planning for retirement has, for some, more immediacy, and for others, more time to plan and, in fact, do well. Because, of course, RDSPs, as I said, have only been in place since 2019. This has never happened before. People who simply qualify for the disability tax credit have never wound up at age 60 having 700 grand, plus perhaps a trust from their parents from when the $1 million house in North York was sold and divided by 2 between him and his sister. So it's a very interesting, different world we're living in now, not least considering the health factors that thankfully are resulting in people living long enough to retire. Let's see
So
what else.
Ken, there's one question here already that maybe kind of ties into what you were just speaking about. The question is, do you need a Henson Trust if you are on CPPD and not ODSP?
The simple answer is no. But if you're on CPPD and you would otherwise qualify for ODSP, CPPD is always less than ODSP. And although it has no asset tests, it doesn't provide drug or dental coverage either. So normally what we do is we advise people who are on CPPD who are automatically medically approved for ODSP to discuss with us what kind of assets they have so that we can exempt them if they have to be exempted, and then to receive the top up to 1228 plus drug and dental. CPPD is often in the range of $500, $600, $700, and of course you can't live on that. So normally people also get ODSP, but for CPPD itself, no. As long as you don't have ODSP to protect, and as long as you can manage the inheritance yourself, because it's simply an inability to work, CPPD, right? Then no, you don't need a Henson Trust for that purpose.
Okay, thanks for answering that question. I might pop in again.
Yeah, please do.
Okay.
Do you want me to speak further, or do you want to do you want me to handle the previously asked questions, or did you want to facilitate the chat stuff?
That was the only question right now in the Q&A.
Oh, okay.
So if you want to continue on,
Okay, I will
you can
do that.
take some of the questions that have been provided, or you can continue with answering or going into more detail about the RDSP and the Henson Trust, if you like.
Okay, I'll carry on. I have a few other things I want to add, and then
Okay.
I'll get to the questions.
Perfect.
So in our standard intake procedure, we have a family details form that it's an online form. It's two pages. It works pretty quickly. We got rid of all the mandatory sections, so nothing's mandatory. And two of the questions we ask are about the disability tax credit, and then for the parents or sibling perhaps, the caregiver credit. So if a person qualifies for the disability tax credit, if you're on ODSP, obviously, ODSP is not taxable income. So there's lots of people who qualify for the disability tax credit and an RDSP who don't pay tax. And they also perhaps don't have the money to contribute to the RDSP. So what we then look into is whether the whether there are family members, parents, siblings, aunts, uncles, who help with necessities to some degree, food, shelter, clothing. And it doesn't have to be to a great extent, but of course, people on ODSP are living in poverty, and family and to some extent friends do help with necessities, food, shelter, clothing. So what we do is we see to the transfer of this credit to a tax-paying parent typically, or if the parents are deceased, then to a sibling. And what the credit does is it reduces the taxes of the parent. Let's say I had some minor surgery on my face, so you can see I'm not quite recuperated yet, but should be in a week or two. So what happens is we transfer this credit, and it reduces the taxes of the tax-paying party by about $1,600 a year, which is good. And it's interesting in the sense that the annual contribution that's required for the RDSP is $1,500. So the tax credit itself reduces taxes by 16 and frees up the 15 that is needed for the annual contribution, which is, I think, kind of nice. So we often find that this credit is not being used, has not been transferred. There's various reasons. One of the most common is that either no one knew about it, they'd been told that the credit would not apply, some doctor decided that it wouldn't apply and they believed them, naturally enough, I guess. Or that the credit was being used until the person left home, moved down to the house, went into supported living, whatever that situation is. Because only 14% of people on ODSP live with family. That's about 48,000 of about 368,000 people. So you can see that it's easy enough for people, parents, to think that if the child doesn't live with them, that they can't use the credit. So when the child goes out into independent, semi-independent, supported living, the parent stops using the credit. And years go by, and then somebody fills out our form, and we identify the fact that this is not correct, and put it back in place, and adjust these credits retroactively for up to 10 years, and recapture about $16,000 for the tax-paying parent. Happens all the time, like every week. And what this also means is that, for example, I spoke with a dad today, and his son has various issues, but he works part-time in 3 jobs. He's not on ODSP. He's approved for the disability tax credit, but he was only approved as such in either 2022 or 2023. The boy is 23 now. So this sort of slid by the side for all these years. But now that it's in place, what I said to the dad, because they hadn't set up an RDSP, and they were referred to me by a financial advisor friend of mine who's a friend of theirs. So he had told them firstly that they should talk to me, and also that they should have an RDSP, the boy should, now that he's approved for the disability credit. So then I had a discussion with the dad, and I'm sure that my friend Anthony, the advisor, would have highlighted this as well. But the point is, when you get that letter of approval from Canada Revenue saying that your son is approved for the disability credit, what it does is it says from what year, and either to what year when you have to reapply, or without termination. But the point of the story is, what's important is, what was the year that has been approved as the commencement year of the credit, even though the approval was in 2022? Because then, of course, you've got all those years to adjust, to recapture the taxes, plus you can make retroactive contributions to the RDSP to pick up those missed years of grants. And depending upon the age of the child, I mean, if the child is 40 and you just put this in place, you've only got 10 years that you could contribute. instead of 20. So of course you want to do the retroactive contribution process over the first 5 years to pick up 15 years basically. So that's RDSPs as well. The caregiver credit reduces taxes for a caregiver, which is easy to make use of if you happen to also use the transferred disability credit. And the caregiver credit is the credit of the parent or the sibling who is a caregiver for their child or their sibling. And what it does is, again, you can adjust it retroactively for up to 10 years. It reduces taxes by about $1,000 a year. And the credit comes into play for the party who uses it, the parent, the taxpayer, when the child turns 18. So unlike the disability credit, which is in place from birth, if appropriate, the caregiver is only applicable from age 18. So it's somewhat reduced. But what we find is very commonly that people don't use this credit. And part of the reason is that, the biggest reason is they don't know about it. That's the biggest reason. But the second biggest reason is that until 2017, the person had to reside with you, or actually you had to reside with them to make it work, which is kind of arcane because it meant that you had to live with them in their home rather than bringing them into your home to be the caregiver, technically speaking, for the credit to be used. Now, of course, there's ways around that. But the point is that in 2017, the reside with criteria was removed. So all of the people who are on ODSP and who have family, and I'll just show you the numbers here if you just give me a second. This is fairly recent. This is February 2020. You can see here that this is the number of people on ODSP in the province at that time. It'll be slightly higher now. Let's say it's 400,000 or something like that. It's a higher number for sure. One family in 10, one household in 10 is the parent household of a person with special needs or disabilities who's on ODSP. It doesn't include people on long-term disability or workman's comp or any of those things. It's just ODSP. And you can see here, this borders number, 47,000. Those are the people who are at home on room and board, $938 a month. Now what that means is that until 2017, only the parents of that 14% could have used the caregiver credit. But then when they removed the reside with criteria in 2017, I think almost all, for sure, of the others would also qualify as a caregiver. Not all, okay. There are situations where somebody just does not provide care, okay. But the bulk of the others, which is a large number, 378, they would all qualify. But as you can see, a large number of them just don't know about the credit. And a large number of them that might know about it know that you're supposed to live with the person, which is no longer true. It's 6 years now that that's not been true. This is a rough breakdown. I'll have you sent these PowerPoint slides along with the recording that Andrea and Shauna will be sending out. These are just the cities that have numbers for ODSP. This is getting a benefit increase. If you're one of those 14,000 who are at home with family and getting $938, if you can shop and cook to some degree, we can probably get you a higher amount.
Ken, there's a question about the RDSP.
Yeah.
I have an RDSP, but no bond. How do you get the bond?
Well, the bond is contributed by the government, whether you do anything at all. You just open the plan. But if your income happens to be greater than 35,000, then you don't get the bond. So you would still get the grant. If you contribute $1,500, the grant is available on the same basis up to a household income of $95,000. And then after $95,000, $1,000 contribution gets a $1,000 grant. But the bond, the $1,000 bond for the individual is not available if the individual's, if the household income is greater than $35,000. The household income means the parent's household up until age 18, and then it means the child's household income, ODSP or employment income, after age 18. So if there's no bond being paid, unless there's some kind of screw up someplace, which happens, it's because somebody's income is greater than $35,000.
Okay, thank you for explaining that.
I was told that there are some people who are on CPPD who aren't on ODSP because they had assets. This certainly can be true. The new ODSP asset test as of 2017 is $40,000 per person. And we have ways of exempting much larger sums. So if you know somebody who's on CPPD and getting $500, $600, $700, $800 a month, who should be getting topped up to $1,228, but have assets, then we should chat about that. Now, of course, if they have a family, if they have a spouse, a wife who works, well, then of course that income of the spouse could also disqualify them from ODSP. But if it's solely that they're a single individual, they're getting CPPD, and they're not on ODSP because they have assets and they've been sent away, well, then that's something that should be discussed. The new rules for income, by the way, is if you are the person with the disability, not part of the benefit unit, the first $1,000 of employment income is now exempt as of March. So you get $1,228 a month, plus you can earn $1,000 with no impact on ODSP. There's a question I was invited to answer earlier on about CPP disability. This is a slide showing the accumulation of RDSPs up to $600,000 or $700,000. The question was, if a person's receiving CPPD and they turn 65, what happens? Well, of course, CPPD is a disability benefit payable while you could be working, but can't. So at age 65, you're deemed to be now retired. And so the CPPD ends. And because for decades you have not contributed to the pension plan, you get a very small amount of CPP, let's just say $100. And then that $100, for every dollar, it offsets 50 cents of the guaranteed income supplement. So that's what happens to that. Everyone here who's taking part should have power of attorney documents, just like all adults. So everyone here should have power of attorney for property and personal care granted to someone that they trust. You can always have this done by a lawyer. If you'd like to do it for free, go to the Ministry of Attorney General website, MAG, Ministry of Attorney General website, and go to the Public Guardian and Trustee section, and then download the free, simple but free power of attorney forms that are on the PGT part of the website, and have two people witness them for you. From there, you can do multiples. So you could give away multiples if needed, or the attorney could give away multiples when you're in the hospital, for example. Hospitals tend to be content with photocopies, but if it had anything to do with property, such as the RDSP, then you'd need a notarial copy. With respect to money, a photocopy or even an original probably wouldn't work, especially with the banks. The banks have a checklist of what they need, and their checklist says notarial copy. So if you offer them one of your originals, my experience over the decades is that they'll say no. The checklist says notarial copy, so you'll have to contact the lawyer and get notarial copies made. If you have issues with respect to competence on the part of the person involved here, well, then you would discuss who would be their substitute decision maker for medical care, and should there be a guardianship application. That's a whole nother discussion, isn't it? So these slides will come along. If you happen to have parents who are teachers, OMERS employees, power generators, workman's comp, these people all have what are called statutory provincial pensions. And these pensions can pass on to an adult dependent survivor. So if you happen to have a parent, so for example, an example of this afternoon, the son who's 23 and the father that I spoke with, retired principal, pension in the $80,000 range, and his wife is a teacher too. This is very common, right? So when they both pass on, as each passes on, usually 2/3 of their pension passes to their survivor spouse. You can see how that works, right? But there's the two of them, and when they're both gone, if you have an adult dependent survivor child, like this 23-year-old son is, who's not an ODSP but is working 3 part-time jobs and making about $12,000 a year, then he would be an adult dependent survivor, and he would get half of each of their pensions. So 40,000 from the dad, and let's say 30,000 from mother. So for retirement planning purposes, once the parents have passed on, he'll have these pensions. This is just the wording, some of the essential basic wording for a Henson Trust, if anyone's interested. The trust wording has to be specific, but if it is sufficiently specific, there's normally you don't find in these wills that have Henson Trusts other than mine, the heading Henson Trust. And so a very common question from people when they fill out the form I have, do you have a will? Yes, no. Yes, we have a will. Does it have a Henson Trust? Unsure. So they may know that something was done. They forget what exactly, because it was 12 years ago. And they look at their will and they don't see Henson Trust anywhere. So they answer unsure. I won't go into this. I won't go into this. And I'll just leave this up. If anybody wants to contact us after the fact, this is how you do it. Your first step is to visit the website and fill in the family evaluation form. Let's see what else I've got here.
Ken, can you maybe explain the Henson Trust just a little bit more in detail? I think there's quite a few people that would be interested in hearing more about the trust.
Okay. Well, the Henson Trust, there's 2 types of trusts, and your pronunciation was wonderfully clear, Shauna. An inter vivos trust is a trust set up while parties are alive, but that's not the most common. It's actually quite rare. The most common type of a trust is what's called a testamentary trust, meaning last will and testament, or drafted into a will and taking effect once someone dies, and leaves a share of their estate to the trustee of this trust for a beneficiary, their child, typically. So it's a testamentary trust flowing from a death. And in a normal trust, the trustee has a fiduciary duty to manage the money, see that it's handled properly, to treat it as if it was his own, but that's the standard. You don't have to treat it to some substantially higher test where you're at risk of falling afoul of some law. You just treat it as your own and treat it as you should do it should do if it was your own, and that's the duty of care. But they have what's called discretion. So normally a trustee has discretion, but they have a fiduciary duty to exercise this discretion. And they can't simply say no, or arbitrarily, or considering external matters like, I want to help the beneficiary, but not as long as he hangs around with that woman, right? I'll never send them on a trip together. This is an external fact that shouldn't really affect the decision making, or other things that are contrary to public policy. But the trustee has discretion. Well, in a Henson trust, you can see that a trustee is given what is called absolute and unfettered discretion. And the reason for this, and I spoke with George Gates before he died some years ago. George he's a lawyer in Guelph at the time. Mr. Henson died back in '85. His daughter Audrey was left $82,000 in this trust arrangement that George had set up. And nobody had ever tested out this wording for ODSP purposes, so it was a complete unknown. But what they did was they put in absolute and unfettered discretion, meaning that the discretion of the trustee, except at a very, very high level, cannot be contested or overthrown by a court. And what this means is that ODSP can't simply cut off ODSP benefits and say, well, look, there's a trust, he's got discretion, go get it from the trustee. We're not going to give you any more money, because that's, of course, what happened in the Henson case. They cut Audrey off. She was supposed to live on it until it was all gone. And the residual beneficiary, which is the Association for the Retarded in Guelph, as they were then called, would not have received anything, because, of course, it'll all be spent on Audrey, right? So anyway, it was contested, and by 1989, it was the settled law of Ontario that if you have an absolute discretion, then ODSP can't compel you to support the trustee, and neither because the beneficiary can't compel you to support them either. So ODSP can't just cut off benefits and try to compel the beneficiary to make the trustee support them, because they can't. And then the non-vesting clause. In a normal trust, the asset of the trust is legally in the hands of the trustee, but it's not his. Right? You can understand that if you're the trustee holding an asset for a beneficiary, it's not yours. I think that's pretty simple and clear, don't you? So it does. But what the case is that in those scenarios, except in a Henson trust, it's the only example, the asset of the trust beneficially belongs to the beneficiary. It's not in his hands. It's not legally in his hands. He can't access it because there's absolute discretion, but it is his. Well, in a Henson trust, there's a specific non-vesting provision which says, no, it's not. No, it's not. It's not yours. It'll eventually vest in your sister, who will get it when you die, but it's not yours. And the other main aspect is the even-handed rule. In all other trusts, unless there's a specific rebuttal of the even-handed rule, the trustee is supposed to somehow keep an even hand, whatever that is, between the beneficiary, the life beneficiary, and the residual beneficiary. And you can see that this becomes complicated when there's a trust for a second wife with the residue going to the kids from the first marriage. So how do you keep an even hand between providing for the second wife, such as investing solely in interest-earning assets and giving her all the interest, and therefore, of course, with time and inflation, writing off the capital value of what's going to be left when she dies for the children? Is that an even hand? Probably not. How you determine what an even hand is, that's a little problematic. But what the rebuttal of the even-handed rule does for me is that we do come across trusts that are small amounts. You never know how much you're going to be leaving when you die. And so you may well have put a Henson trust provision in your will, but then you die and it's $80,000. Well, $80,000 in a lot of cases doesn't warrant setting up the trust and filing annual tax returns and paying fees to trustees and this kind of thing. So in those scenarios, we have ways, if it's appropriate, if it's the right thing to do, to close out the trust, give the money directly to the beneficiary, exempt it for ODSP purposes. Well, you couldn't do that if you're supposed to keep an even hand between the life beneficiary and the residual beneficiary. So if Dad's lawyer has been smart enough to put the even-handed rebuttal in, that means that you can, without reference to the residual beneficiaries, simply give the asset, roll it out to the son, close the trust. You'd want to exempt the asset, of course, for ODSP purposes, but that's what we discussed earlier, exempting assets that aren't in a trust.
Okay, we have 2 more questions, and I'm just watching the time. We have about 10 minutes left until 8 o'clock. So this question comes from someone in Alberta, and they
Yep.
want to know about passing the pension to an adult child. Would that apply in Alberta as well?
Say that again, please.
So you were talking about like an OMERS or a government pension that can be transferred to the dependent child that's
Yeah.
an adult.
Yeah.
Is that also applicable in Alberta?
That's my understanding, yeah. All of the provinces, you can understand, these are all provincial statutory pensions. All of the employees are unionized and they talk to each other's union. So my understanding, I haven't done a complete scan of all of these, but it's my understanding that these statutory pensions are available because obviously these individuals, city workers, power generators, teachers, they all have pensions. And so my understanding is, yes, that this is available and applicable. The one difference that I've seen so far, and I don't have enough information on a broad basis to test this whole thing out, is that in other provinces, if you want to leave a pension for your child, that's a third pensioner. And so it has an impact on how much you get, which you'd think from an actuarial perspective makes sense, right? But that's not the case in Ontario. I've never heard anybody say that, oh, well, if you want your child to get half of your original pension, you're going to get less. So that's the biggest difference that I can see. I'd love to do a comparative study province-wide. Whoever's asking the question, if you want to do the research about this, I'll tell you how to go about it.
Okay. And we do have some contacts in Alberta that may know a little bit more than Ken does, since he doesn't practice in Alberta. So
Yeah,
just
check it out.
email us and we can help you with that as well.
Yeah,
And
no,
then
don't expect to get a lot of clear information from the pension people because they don't know much either. But you can see it from the website. You'll see there's pensions for children, pensions for children who are in university, pensions for kids with disabilities. But what you're specifically looking for isn't pensions for children. It's for adult dependent survivors with disabilities.
Thank you for clarifying that. And the next question is, I am a young adult receiving ODSP. If I'm approved to contribute to an RDSP, what happens if my medical situation changes and I no longer receive ODSP during my adulthood?
Well, if what I'm hearing in this question, correct me, what I'm hearing is 2 questions, one about ODSP and RDSP.
Yes.
And the question I'm hearing is, if I'm no longer ODSP approved, do I still have an RDSP?
Yes, I think can I still contribute to the RDSP?
Well, the RDSP, the reason you have an RDSP is because you're approved for the disability tax credit, which is a federal tax credit. It has nothing to do with ODSP.
Okay, perfect. So you can have an RDSP and not be on ODSP, and you can be on ODSP and have an RDSP.
Yep. And you can be on ODSP and unable to function in a competitive workplace and qualify for ODSP, but not be all or substantially all of the time markedly restricted in the activities of daily living and approved for the disability credit. So it's easy to get ODSP, much easier to get ODSP than it is to be approved for the disability credit and then to have an RDSP.
And if that person hasn't tried for the disability tax credit, would you recommend that they do because they are receiving ODSP?
Well, I think what they should do is they should sit back and talk to someone objectively, not their parents necessarily, but parents tend to try to sort of modify and accommodate and put up with disabilities, because of course often they've made the household situation so accommodating that the disabilities seem to be less, which is fine, right? But what it comes down to is, are you all or substantially all of the time, not sporadically, all or substantially all of the time, markedly restricted? You take substantially longer? Do you fail to set and keep goals? Do you need constant supervision? And then, of course, there's, in a physical context, there's mobility, elimination, vision, hearing, all of these things. The form you look at, the form you would have to have completed and signed by a doctor is a T2201. And you'd be wise to not submit this without some guidance from someone who knows what will succeed. It's harder the second time. If you just rush through, you're doing it, you're the person with the disability. I mean, let's be realistic here. If you are someone who's likely to qualify for the disability tax credit, what it means is that all or substantially all of the time, it takes you markedly longer to do things, or you are substantially restricted, or you need constant supervision, or you can't set and keep goals. Now, how is this likely to succeed? Right?
Right.
So
I get what you're saying.
yeah. So from there, it's a matter of, well, all right, what is it we really need to succeed here? And am I the person to do it? No, you're probably not.
So it's probably best to consult with a professional, someone like yourself who knows the system inside and out,
Yeah.
and can help you with that.
Yeah. And the payoff is that if you get retroactively approved, perhaps this means that somebody can use the credit and collect retroactive tax credit recaptures.
Absolutely. Because, we don't want the government to have your money if you can have it.
Exactly.
The question from Alberta, they're saying that the LAPP pension is not giving clear answers about dependent adult.
Right. That's what I said.
Yeah. So for that question, we can help you out and connect you with some of our contacts in Alberta. So I think the last question we're going to have time for, this one is, how can a person who worked for a few decades on ODSP for the past decade find out how much they will receive from CPP or other government payments to seniors once they turn 65?
You ask them. Standard procedure. Everybody does this.
So you just contact CPP and
Yep.
and ask them. Okay.
Yep.
I didn't know that myself.
Yeah. I mean, you can appreciate that because the peak of the baby boom turned 65 in 2021, there have been a lot of questions about that.
And I just have one more question about the RDSP. I have an RDSP. I'm over the age of 49, so I can't contribute to it anymore to receive the government income from it.
That's right.
But how should I invest it? Invest that money that I do have in the RDSP?
Well, you
Would
you should have a financial advisor.
Okay.
You should get some financial literacy. It's kind of fun. Now, in today's world, there's lots of opportunities to get 5% on a 1, 2, 3-year-old GIC. So that's pretty simplistic. But normally what happens, the problem that occurs is that these RDSPs are set up with banks, and they're not even really set up with the bank, because the bank is not the trustee of the RDSP. It's a third party, and the banks they have a definite interest in you not making any kind of growth, because if you've ever set up a bank account, you know that you're immediately try to move you into a so-called high interest savings account to get 0.5% interest, right? So it's not a high interest savings account at all, and it's certainly not an investment account. But what it means is that this means that they give you 0.5%, but then they get to lend out your $1,000 at 4.9, 4.5, right? That's why they push the savings, high interest savings accounts, so they can reinvest your money. So what you find is that unless you're a knowledgeable financial person, or you get a financial advisor, the money's just going to sit there and do nothing, frankly, if it's with a bank. So you'd want to move it to a financial advisor who either would leave it with CIBC, perhaps, but advise you on what to put into it as an investment, or would pull it and either place it with Mackenzie Financial, or and then look at the spectrum of investment options that they have, the vehicles, or give it to Investors Group. They've got their own in-house stuff. Go to Edward Jones, Raymond James, but what you need is an advisor. Now, if you decide you just want to do it yourself, simply because it's a small amount, sure. But at least put it into some kind of reasonable GIC that's going to get you more than inflation. And of course, inflation is 4.4% right now.
Well, thank you so much, Ken. This hour has been very interesting. So thanks, everyone, and have a great night.